So could you just start off by telling me how you got involved with the post-prison education program?
Sure. So it was back in 2010. I met a guy. I'm part of a 12-step fellowship, and there was a guy that came up and talked to me and handed me this brochure for an event that was happening. It was right around Christmas time. I had gotten out of prison in October, and I think that it was like November or December. So there was like this program, and it was called Gifts for Kids, and it was for children of incarcerated parents. And apparently, because I had just gotten out of prison, I qualified to bring my kid. And so I did. And it turned out that the person that gave me the brochure was on the board of directors for the post-prison education program. And he had this conversation with me at the end of the day after we had went to that event, and said that there was somebody that he wanted me to meet. And and he gave me a phone number, and I called him, and it turned out that it was Ari. And Ari, I went to the office, and they convinced me that I should go to school, and I was not prepared for any of it. I was currently working as a trades painter, and a few weeks later, I enrolled at Shoreline Community College.
What was
So
that
that's
conversation like?
Ari's and mine.
Yeah.
Yes, so I just called him up, and I said, yeah, your friend Vance asked me to call you. And I really didn't know what to expect. I said, yeah, I just got out of prison or whatever. I didn't know what the post-prison education program was. I don't even think I knew the name of the organization at the time. I think he just told me to call this guy. And, I was on a mission to change my life. And so Ari asked me to come down to his office, and I came in being my normal self. I'm sure Ari has a very dramatic story to tell about that first meeting. I just came down there, and he, had all these grand ideas for my life. He wanted me to, I don't remember if it was the first time that I came down there, but he wanted me to, talk to him and these other people in his office about my life. And I did that. And, and prior to me going down there, Vance had actually asked me to write, I think it was prior to that. They asked me to write something, so I wrote a little narrative. And and so they convinced me that it was a good idea to go to school. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I knew I just wanted to be of service to other people. So I walked out of that office still not knowing what the post-prison education program was, feeling like, yeah, I've got to start school now. I have no idea what the hell is going on. And I, quit my job and went to school. And that's kind of what happened. It took me a couple months to even know, because nobody really explained to me what post-prison did. But they apparently gave me a scholarship, which I didn't know that until I had a breakdown about my bills. And I like a literal breakdown. I went crazy. And come to find out, they would help like pay some of my bills while I was attending school. So yeah, that's kind of what it was like. I didn't know what the hell was going on. I had no idea.
What kind of, like, in retrospect, what kind of things were they helping you out with that were really helpful to you at that time?
Well, at that time, I mean, they were super present for me. As a prisoner who had just gotten out, it was my third time in prison. They were really available. Like, I could call or go to the office, and there was always somebody there. There was somebody there with a lived experience, even though I intimidated the hell out of him. So I don't know how helpful that was for me, but just because I think he was more scared of being out than I was. But so they were super present. That was a really big piece that was really important as a former prisoner. And they did supplement my situation with, financially. I had bills that came up. They paid the bills. They helped me with the process of getting into school and communicating with, financial aid and different things like that. So they were really, really good at navigating that system. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. what else did they do? Yeah, they provided like get-togethers of other folks that had been in prison, and there was always food involved, which was nice. They provided tutoring, and uh, also I think that I got one of the very first Google Chromebooks. So they provided supplies in order for us to be successful in school. If I needed anything, I probably could have asked. Like, I'm far more aware now of what the program offers than I was then. But piece by piece, I sort of figured it out back then. So those were some really important components.
Definitely. I was reading your Truman Scholarship, like UW bio.
Yeah.
It was talking, one of your quotes was, when people are released, they often are released without having the skills to succeed.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what needs to be provided to those folks so that they can get on that path?
Sure. So first of all, my focus isn't post-prison. My focus is while somebody's in prison.
Okay.
So I am probably your average prisoner. I grew up in a drug-addicted home. I was using drugs before I was 6 years old when I started using drugs. And so there were a lot of fundamental things that were not given to me in the beginning of my life. So I grew up for a really long time in a very distorted sense of reality. My foundation was very fractured. And that's a lot of prisoners. Either they grow up in a similar fashion or they have been involved in life for a really long time. So they've been disconnected from their foundation, so to speak. There are a lot of really important components that are necessary to be in place for people. There is a potential that stuff can be sort of thrown together piecemeal upon release. However, the likelihood of somebody being able to access all of those things upon release is not very realistic, because when a person gets out of prison, they have to focus on being able to take care of themselves economically and to figure out how to navigate life. And that can be extremely challenging. So when I made that statement, like, what I think is really necessary is when a person goes into prison, from the time that somebody steps into prison, it needs to sort of look very similar to this, in my opinion. There needs to be a very thorough assessment when somebody arrives into the prison system. In that assessment, what needs to be assessed is the person's foundational learning via, institutions. So what did their education look like? What was their upbringing like? What kind of household did they come from? How far did they get in school? How long have drugs and alcohol been involved in the person's life? Is there any job training that has ever occurred? Do they have domestic violence in their history? Any type of sexual assault? Things like that. And just because, well, let me just tell you that the majority of people that have sexually assaulted me have never been charged with a sex crime. So a lot of people actually participate in those things, even though they're not very likely to become vocal about that at any stage of incarceration. Do they have children? So is parenting necessary? Have they had evictions and things like that? So are finance and budgeting classes necessary? And so I think that what needs to happen inside of a prison, there needs to be group therapy where people are talking about, what caused them to come into prison, and the other things that have occurred in their lives. There needs to be drug and alcohol treatment. These things need to be mandatory for the entire population. The only other choice would be, I'm not going to do it. That's fine. Go to the hole. You know what I mean? Because I think that it takes a village, no matter whether it's a village when the child is small or a village when the adult then needs to be restructured. So I think there needs to be anger management, domestic violence classes. There needs to be sexual deviancy treatment, which they do have, but it's very short-lived. There needs to be education and job training. If a person doesn't have their GED, that's great. We do that, and then we provide either vocational or post-secondary education training, and there needs to be actual OJT, like on-the-job training for different things. And those things need to be able to transfer out into the community once they're released. I think that there's a case management portion that needs to be present. There need to be sporadic meetings throughout incarceration. And then when a person is about a year short, they need to start engaging with that case manager more regularly. There needs to be continuity with the transition into the community. And that's when post-prison programs are necessary. And in those post-prison programs, people need to be trained. We have a lot of what's considered re-entry or post-prison programs, and those programs are very one-dimensional. Once a person is released, you know, they not only do they do probation, but in that same office, they have access to case management, and maybe it's the same person, I don't know. However, there would be regular check-ins. There would also be clean and sober accountability, but there would be housing options and things like that. They would immediately transfer into programs, you know, whether it be finishing their education and then working part-time or whatever. And those processes would be navigated with somebody that is familiar, somebody that can do their FAFSA and things like that. But every prison would have access to education, and every person would have access to all those things. And inside of the prison, my fantasy is that the orderly operations of the prisons would still be supported, because people would work in shorter shifts, like 4-hour shifts. People would be given a stipend as opposed to certain people getting $55 a month. And the stipend would then have to be budgeted, which they would work with that because they would have to allot their money in their own way. But everyone would be mandated to participate in this programming. It would literally be the functioning of the prisons. And then what we would create as a result of that is we would create a much safer community. The recidivism rate would systematically start to reduce. Granted, not everybody is going to get it together the first time. There are going to be people that, you know, definitely reoffend, maybe people that are really short timers in there, but however, they would still have access. And those things would be mandatory in every single prison. So what I can tell you is that all of those components are the different things that I have sort of piecemealed together in my own life that have caused me to be successful in having sustained freedom. And that's such a relative state, that's such a relative word, freedom, but it has allowed me to not have to participate in a relationship inside of the Department of Corrections. And so I don't think that, what I can tell you is that those are the things that people are missing or that people are avoiding dealing with. And what I've really sort of gathered is that I'm somewhat of an anomaly, where I've sort of gained the awareness that I needed help in a lot of these areas on my own. But this has been sort of an ongoing theme for me since I was really young. I knew that there were things that I needed. And there's a very small percentage of people that have that same awareness. A lot of the people that get out and are successful have a lot of different sort of supports or a different foundation. The majority of people that are being incarcerated are afflicted in a way that they need to be repatterned. You know what I mean? And patterns, this is what I know, is that we function in patterns, and everybody has them. Everybody has them, right? So whether it's you overeat, you overshop, you have credit cards that you can't afford, but you can't stop buying things on Amazon or wherever. It's chocolate, it's, you know, working out, it's sex, it's drinking, it's whatever. Like, everybody sort of has their vice or vices. And the problem with people that go to prison is their vices cause serious problems in their lives. And they cause problems that make the community want to sort of lock them up and throw away the key. And then once that gavel is down on the desk, people are sort of like out of sight, out of mind. But people don't necessarily take into consideration that they're getting out. 95% of people are getting out. And so if we want a safer community, like, it is our job to be the village. It is our responsibility. And so, like, I am 100% scholarshiped up, right? And I attend school 9 months out of the year. There's a potential I could probably go all year. I'm not interested in that. I like mountains in the summer, but You know, currently it costs about $35,000 for me to frugally support my household, pay my bills, and attend a university for 9 months. If we added another $5,000 to $6,000 onto that, it would cost roughly $40,000 to $42,000 to support my household for an entire calendar year while I'm getting a university degree. And it's not, you know, and it's a good university degree. We're paying about $48,000 a year to incarcerate one individual in a Washington state prison. So you know, if you look on the DOC website, you'll see their little fancy thing where it shows these different programs, right? So when a lay person looks at that page, they're going, oh, look at all these programs in the prison. Okay, so those programs are very sporadic. Typically, they're church or volunteer based. Those programs work with less than 5% of the population. I'm going to say that maybe it's 1% of the population. And those programs are very one-dimensional, and they don't have the other necessary components to restructure the prisoner's life. So, you know, there's this sort of misguided message that's being given when a person looks at these things, you know, and that includes the educational programs that are provided inside of they say that there are educational programs inside of 8 prisons. I would question whether or not those programs actually provide an education that will transfer into a living wage job once a person is released. And, you know, and so this is the thing. So I have 17 felony convictions, right? Let's say that I've never been self-aware. And let's say that when I go into prison, and this is the average story for most people, I go in and I'm doing push-ups and working out in the yard and playing pinochle and hanging out with my bros and being a solid dude, right? And I go through this little AA program that most of my credits aren't actually transferable, but I have this little piece of paper, and I get out. I haven't been through any kind of sort of training to help me learn how to navigate any arenas that associate's degree would apply to. I haven't learned how to appropriately navigate interviewing, sending out resumes. I haven't learned how to function appropriately in the workforce. So I'm still this solid dude, right? And I'm super buff and I look good. And so I started messing with this chick when I was in work release. And I just use the dude because I just know so many guys, right? Women have actually less opportunities in prison than the men do. Less living transferable, I guess, opportunities. And so, you know, so I get out and, you know, it's a week or two and I'm like living at my mom's or somewhere, right? Or maybe I'm living with this chick that I met in work release, right? And we don't know each other. And maybe she has a kid and maybe I'm a little bit crazy and I'm super uncomfortable because now I feel trapped because I didn't really want to be in a relationship with this chick. So now I feel like super stressed out, like I need to get a job or something. And this associate's degree isn't working. Like I'm showing people that I have it, but I don't have a job and I'm getting more stressed out. Well, and I see my bro that I was in prison with downtown because I'm on the bus or on the train, right? And well, he's got some weed. I don't even smoke weed, but you know what, dude? I'm stressed out. So I'm just going to smoke some weed with this guy. And then, well, and so we exchange numbers and then I'm super paranoid because weed makes me crazy, right? And now I'm like, I don't even want to go. Oh crap, I totally forgot I have to UA next week for my PO, right? And so, you know what? Now I can't UA because they're going to send me back to prison because they're not doing 3 days right anymore because it's COVID, right? I have no idea how to get a job. Now I'm screwed. Oh, I ran into my other bro. He's got a bunch of meth. You know what? I'm just going to get some and sell it. I'm not going to do any because, well, that's stupid, right? Because I'll go back to prison. So I'm not going to do any meth. I'm just going to get some of this and I'm going to sell it. And then I'm going to get my own place. Cause this chick, I don't even think I like her. And the kid is like cool and stuff, but I'm not trying to be anybody's parent. Cause I mean, duh, obviously I can't even take care of myself. And you know what? I don't want to go back there tonight because I'm super paranoid. I'm just going to do one line. And then I'm screwed. Next thing you know, I'm getting another prison sentence. So that's kind of the way that it works. And that's what our prison system is currently set up to support. And and I mean, I'm not saying that like the prisoner doesn't have to take any sort of responsibility in their life, but it would be really hard for me to take responsibility when I don't know what to take responsibility for. And
yeah,
the role of the state, I mean, they're doing their jobs. I don't think they know what to do really. And I think that financially they're sort of stunted. So, I mean, it would be fantastic if we could somehow set up a program, post prison that would support, but I don't think that's realistic. And so, one of the problems that I see with some of the reentry programs are that everybody sort of offers one little thing and there's no collaboration. It's almost like it's almost like they all act like a bunch of prisoners, really, where they're super territorial and this is what I do and I'm holding on to this, and this is what I do and I'm holding on to this. If they actually worked together, they would create a more cohesive, a more holistic sort of community. And we see that in social services where, you have like DESC and Catholic Community Services and, these different housing programs and, like Salvation Army and their day programs and different things. And they all collaborate. They all work together because they all offer different things. And so like, for example, I have a client, he's totally freaking out. I supervised a number of case management programs in the past. And they were usually associated with either a shelter or a day program. So when one of my clients gets kicked out of the day program and shelter, then it's my job. Like I get the opportunity then to reach out to some of my partners in different agencies and be like, hey, I'm sending my client down here. Like, this is what happened here. This is what I need. I'm this close to getting him into housing. Can you please accommodate that? I'm going to send him down in a cab or on a bus or whatever. And that's the sort of like continuity and relationship that we need amongst the post-prison programs. Sorry, that was a really winded answer.
That was a perfect answer.
Okay.
So when you talk about one-dimensional programs, you mean like just housing or like
or just education or just
okay.
Training in this area. We're not and I say we because I've been involved in some of these programs,
right.
But and these are my people, so I feel like I participate. So we're not taking a look at the holistic problem. We're not taking a look at the broken home. We're not taking a look at the abuse and need for treatment. We're not, or need of therapy. And we might be identifying those things personally or maybe as a staff base, but we're not able to sort of, I guess, require or provide services for the person. And the problem is that the likelihood of the person participating in those things post-release is a lot slimmer for a number of reasons, because A, they have to participate in survival. B, because they're not inside anymore and they're not getting ready to do all that stuff. This is what they're focused on. And oftentimes they're not able to sort of articulate or perceive that those things are actually necessary, right? Because the human ego sort of separates us from that self-awareness oftentimes.
So what are those steps in getting people into programming from like 1% to 100%?
Well,
what does that look like?
That is a good question. So honestly, like that's sort of what I'm going to try to create some research questions around for my undergraduate research. And so I think what that looks like from 1% to 100% is that we have to restructure the prison system. We have to restructure the way that time is spent. I was recently talking to somebody that has been trying to implement certain things in the system, and it sounds like, funding is an issue. Funding is always an issue somewhere. However, I'm a believer that we can do that, anything is possible. And so, that is sort of like, this has been my dream. I've been contemplating this for about, I don't know, 7+ years. And initially, my idea was we create a small program and put it in one prison, right? And the problem with that statement is, and mind you, this became sort of my passion. I was the victim of domestic violence, and in 2016, my husband had relapsed and went crazy, and I recognized, as I was participating in the court process, because I testified for him and against him, the state wanted to give him a life sentence. And it could have very easily happened. However, I recanted on part of my testimony, and I thought that was excessive and not helpful. What he needed was help. He did not need to be warehoused for the rest of his life. And so I made it my problem, and I took the prosecution on, and I won. And 2 trials, and participated in 4 different trials with him. I was a victim and defendant, victim and what, I don't know what the hell. I was a victim and the person that was on the stand in 2 of those trials. And I stayed really involved in his life, and through that process, and I've sort of, like, from an outsider's point of view, implemented a lot of these things in his life.
Yeah.
From the outside, which has been very challenging. However, he is doing exceptionally well. He's been released. He got out. I wanted him to do about 10 years. He did 4. But that's okay, because he's doing really well. And but I looked at the situation, and I was like, he's going to go in and get out the same person. The prison system doesn't provide assistance to people. It does not rehabilitate anybody. It doesn't do any of these things. And these are the things he needs. And I was like, and what about everybody else? So over the last 4 years, I've been in a tremendous amount of fights, it feels like. So I've also fought, the Seattle School District, and I'm in the process of fighting them again. And now I've realized that my problem isn't just prison, it's also public school systems. And so, which makes me want to that's elected official as the end result. And so that's the goal. So, but I just sort of recognize how a lot of these things aren't present in either system. And so, it's like, okay, I'm able to be here to fight for this specific situation. I know this isn't an isolated situation, right? Like with the school, it's like, what about all these other parents that can't be here, that are single parents, that are immigrants and refugees, that have language barriers, that are afraid of retaliation, or, like ICE or some sort of retribution, or they just don't care. Like, what about those kids? Like, who's advocating for them, right? So it's the same thing with the prison system. It's like, okay, what about the other 18,300 and some odd people? What about them? Right. And so, and what I can tell you is that nobody, well, maybe some, we'll just say 5% of the population would be like, yes, let's do this. Everybody else is going to be like, F that. I'm not doing that. You know what I mean? Because people just sort of want to be leisurely and do what they want to do. And some people aren't interested in changing anything, but that's okay. I don't give my kid options. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not going to just let her raise herself, because that's sort of what you do. You know what I mean? And that's sort of what being a parent is about. And so I don't really know how to implement it. That is what I'm going to be trying to figure out really over the next couple of years. and trying to figure out, which direction to go in my education. I know that the article said JD and MPA. I don't know. I'm super passionate about political science. And so I'm, not really sure. Like, I'm not sure what it looks like or how we're going to get there, but I just know that we're going to get there. So I don't know. I'll keep you posted.
Okay, perfect. Can you talk about some of the work you've done, I guess in like general rehabilitation, like you were talking about working at men's shelters?
Yeah.
What other kind of, like, if it's a part of research work or volunteer work, or in the past few years, what have you been a part of?
Sure. So I haven't done any research work up to this
Okay.
point, aside from my own personal sort of endeavors. So I have, the first real sort of mentoring kind of work I did was back in 2008. I was getting ready to go back to prison, and I was attending CCAP, which is Community Correction Alternative Programming, and it's connected with the King County Jail. I was waiting to go to prison, and they put me on day reporting. And while I was there, I got really involved in the classes. They had some social responsibility classes that they forced people to go to, which of course, I try to be the best I can in what I do. Granted, I am never at the top of the class, but I'm not like academically, like I mean, my GPA, I guess, is pretty good, but like, I just get involved. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, I get super involved because I want to know and I want to learn. And so I participate. And so because of that, like, I sort of got set aside with a small group of other participants, and we would sort of like, advocate for certain things, and, sort of mentor some of the participants. And we participated in these different filmings for the program, trying to save it. Like, they were on the chopping block during budget time. So we did these different, oh my gosh, these little shows, King County television shows. And so it sort of started there back in 2008. Before that, though, like, I had tried attending school in 2007. I was doing some online stuff. My daughter was really young, and I knew that I wanted to work in social services. So that's where the seed sort of was planted. And so then I went to prison, and then I got out and I met Ari, and I started doing stuff inside of the prisons. I absolutely fell in love with going into the prisons and talking to my people, because, when I was in prison, some of the most impactful and meaningful things which ever occurred for me were very occasionally, very sporadically, you would have a former prisoner come back in with a program. Usually it was a church program or something. And it was really like, it created a lot of hope when somebody would come back in and say, you know what, I was in prison. And then they're coming back in as a person that's no longer in prison. Like, that gave me hope. And I think it gave a lot of other people hope as well, for the potential of not ever having to go back again, of being able to change our lives, right? Because even though, like, I had a good time in my crazy life for a long time, it was hell. Like, I didn't really want to be there. I wanted my life to look very different. And I just couldn't seem to make that manifest. So I started doing some, going into the prisons with Ari, and then I ended up relapsing. And then when I got out of jail, he post-prison paid for a private attorney for me, and because I was looking at a fourth prison sentence. And so that gave me an opportunity to, go to drug court, and which I did. And I started volunteering in the office and talking to guys on the phone, and going into more prisons, and, just doing a lot of work with folks that were getting out of prison. And that was super easy for me. All I really was doing was helping them navigate what I was navigating. And that was super powerful for me. Like, and it assisted me in a really important component of my recovery, because it allowed me to be of service in some really meaningful ways, in ways that assisted people in not destroying their lives any longer. And so I reached a point where I wasn't interested in going to school. It was a whole big money thing, right? I didn't want to accrue a bunch of debt, and I was also pretty crazy. So the likelihood of me like staying stable, I had all kinds of other crazy stuff going on in my life. I just wasn't ready, and I didn't want to commit to something that I was going to potentially screw up. And I had a really long history of screwing stuff up. So I just was working, and then once I completed drug court, I made a decision in my own mind that I was going to go apply for work elsewhere. I wanted to wait till I was off paper, though, so that they couldn't look me up and say, oh, you can't, you have a conviction that's pending or whatever. So I applied to Catholic Community Services, and it took a while because I have a really extensive criminal history, but the person really wanted to hire me, and I got pulled into the agency, and I knew that all I needed to do was get an open door. So I started as an advocate in a women's housing program, and it was a housing first program. These women were literally plucked off the streets, so they were super fresh and really crazy. And I just know how to speak their language, and they actually loved me. And then I ended up being hired on as a peer support person with a behavioral health program. I ended up doing that for about 13 months and got my certification and stuff. And then my husband relapsed during that time, which I was totally fine with that job. I was making, I wasn't making a lot, but I was making like 17 something an hour, and my husband was working. And so we were fine financially, and it was super easy. It was just kind of one of those things where you could just sort of relax and just be there. Right. And then when he relapsed, I was now responsible for all of the bills and everything that we were both previously doing. So I applied to another position in the agency. Well, I applied to like 5 other positions, and every program wanted to hire me. So one of the people in headquarters came up and they asked me, which one do you want? And I was like, okay. So I chose the supervisory position, and it challenged me a lot. But so I got the opportunity to really, in all of those jobs, including post-prison, I just got the opportunity to show up in people's life very authentically as myself, and help navigate systems, really. And I got a lot of really fantastic training while I worked for Catholic Community Services, and I learned how to not show up like a hard-ass prisoner, because I did that for a long time. And one of the things that I learned was that approach doesn't really help people. There are some circumstances where it does. Some people aren't soft and fluffy. Some people want you to sort of just be straight with them. And I'm always straight with everybody, but like I learned how to really sort of approach people from a trauma-informed care perspective, and from a strength-based perspective. And so, for 3 years, I supervised 3 different programs, 5 different case managers, and carried caseloads in those programs as well. And, and what I got to do is just work alongside people and navigate housing systems. That's what my teams did. We got people into housing from homelessness. We got the opportunity to advocate for people when people were, displaying certain behaviors and, having the potential of being kicked out. And, I learned how to be really compassionate and look at people's circumstances instead of their behaviors. And I got to train my staff how to stop taking things personally. And I learned personally how to stop taking things personally. And it's been through all of this work that I've learned how to become a better and stronger person. So I was sitting in a county meeting, and I got to participate in a lot of really interesting things with the county and the city, and different portions of institutions that really are clueless as to people's lived experiences. And you got a lot of people that have read some books, and they sit in these meetings and they have no experience working with the individual. And it's fascinating. And I was sitting in a meeting one day, and I looked around, and this was during like the court processes, and I asked myself, and these are all a bunch of degree holding people that feel super fancy and stuff. And I said to myself, is this it, Ginny? Is this it? This is what you're going to do for the rest of your life? And the answer was no. So, you know, I've taken all of that like experience, and I don't know if that answered your question in detail enough, but I've taken all of that experience and I've applied it to my education.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just that like really holistic approach that keeps shaping what you continue to do. And also
Yeah.
that like mentorship seems to be a really huge part of what of your life and also what you are offering to others.
Yes. And that's one of the things, like, even though I stopped working for post prison, like I try to take as many opportunities as I can to go inside of prisons, because I still like talking to people and letting them know.
Yeah.
And I'm credible, you know, I'm credible. They know, I know people in every prison, but they believe me when I say, dude, this is what my life looked like, and like this is what I'm doing now. And then, you know, and I usually take opportunities to mentor the people that are getting out of prison. Um, because there are some components that, you know, the programs don't provide.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, I mean, this seems to just touch on the importance of mentorship. Like, you have the immediate barriers to entry, like housing and those simple things that you need to pay for and you can't.
Yeah.
But then what are those more long-term barriers that
Yeah.
aren't?
So one of the things that typically is not addressed with somebody getting out of prison is their addiction. Most of the people that, especially the people that come to post prison, they're drug addicts, and most of the time they're not participating in any sort of recovery on the inside, which you're going to act in patterns. People act in patterns. And that's another thing, is identifying patterns and being able to point that out and communicate that with people. So, you know, but one of the biggest coping mechanisms that people have are drugs and alcohol. That drugs and alcohol were usually present when, you know, the person committed their crime, and for oftentimes long periods of time before that. And uh, so drugs and alcohol, therapy, domestic violence stuff, relationships. Relationships are a big one, because that's usually the first drug that a person puts in their life once they're released, because they've been, you know, isolated with the same sex for long periods of time. And so the first thing somebody does is it's something that is inherent in the human being, right? It's like we want to be connected to somebody else. But really, if we break it down to chemistry, we're uncomfortable, we're insecure, we get out, we're afraid. Um, a lot of society doesn't look at prisoners as vulnerable. They're very vulnerable. There is unidentified fear that transfers into ego. And that ego usually shows up saying, I got this, I can take care of myself. And inside, it's like, I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. I don't know how to catch this bus. I've been locked up so long, I don't know how to use this phone. I'm really uncomfortable. And, you know, which makes them really susceptible to when they run into that person on the street to participate in whatever chemical that person is using to change the way that they feel. But usually the first thing that we use to change the way that we feel is another person. Drugs, sex, and violence all are very, very interconnected when it comes to releasing certain chemicals in our body. And so, you know, usually what occurs is that somebody like connects with, you know, a person. You know, those are some of the biggest things, and just really sort of helping people to feel comfortable identifying the insecurity around a lot of those things, I think is super important. Those are some of the biggest components that I cover when I mentor somebody. I allow people to feel comfortable being vulnerable, and how I do that typically is like I communicate parts of my story, and I talk about fear, and I really like emphasize like my dependence on, you know, outside things to change the way that I feel internally. And what tends to happen with those kind of situations is sometimes you might have a staff member that's working in the office that's a former prisoner that hasn't been out very long, and they're giving a contradictory sort of narrative to what's being communicated in the mentorship. And so there can be some confusion there. So, I don't know. And I feel like this technically is sort of off topic, but yeah, with the programs, and this happens across all of the reentry programs, because usually with reentry programs, they're trying to hire people that have lived experiences. One of the things that I notice across all of these programs is that the people with lived experience have not been trained in any way to work with the prisoner. So they're literally being that same dude or girl that's on the yard, and they're still living inside of that prison mentality. And it sort of shits all over mentorship when that happens. And then you have a confused participant. You have a confused client that is getting a very mixed message. And that sort of when they decide to, because relapse happens. It happens. Relapse is usually the thing that happens in all of these programs that sort of screws somebody over. Which is, and let me just say this, let me sort of back up to one of our first questions. A way that a post-prison program could be more effective is not just like, it's definitely going into the prisons to work with people, but like the people that are approved to coming into the programs, like there needs to be some training that starts happening when the people are inside of the programs, right? I mean, inside of the prisons, because it's like, okay, we can identify, and I think that that's something that needs to happen within these programs, is like we need to identify the components that people are most afflicted by once they're released, right? Like, let's identify these areas and let's talk about how we start addressing these areas post-release. Like, we become this is a good idea from my own nonprofit. Anyways, we become the case management portion of my big dream, right? We become the program that comes in and starts working with the prisoners. We come in and do these presentations, and then, we have another portion that's working with people when they're a year short, but we're working with them inside of the prison, not just on the other end of the phone, but we're working with them inside of prisons. And, we're starting to teach them about these things. Like, we're starting to require, you need to start going to meetings in here. Like, you need to start participating in mental health treatment, and that the name, it just needs to be called something else, not mental health and not therapy, right? It needs to be, you need to start participating in groups. Prisons need to start having sort of process groups, and with a facilitator that actually puts in the hard questions, you know what I mean? So, and that could happen in every prison with a volunteer, you know what I mean? So I promise you that if we have enough do-gooders with MSWs out there that would totally freaking do that. So, but so you start participating a year short with any and all of these different programs, and these components are all required in order to participate in the program. Like, there is nothing wrong with having requirements, you know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with having requirements, and the requirements set people up to be familiar with that process, instead of sort of, all right, okay, we're driving by, I'm gonna open the door, I'm gonna push you out, and once you just grab onto the light post or whatever so you don't fly into the wall and you just throw the person off the bus, you know what I mean? Because that's sort of like what's happening right now.
A slight pivot. I saw on your Facebook page that you had posted about if someone who is fearful of prisoners being released or has been a victim of violent crime, knows someone who's been a victim of violent crime, etc. You said, I would love to have a conversation with you. I think it would help me with one of my big goals. Could you talk about what that big goal is, or just in general what you're hoping to, what those conversations mean? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So the big goal is to restructure prison time. I am so like I think a way to describe it is so if I walk into the best ice cream shop in town and I tell all of the patrons that are there eating ice cream and in line for ice cream, dude, this is the best ice cream in town. You need to eat here. They're like, yeah, we know. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now. I'm like, yeah, we need to restructure prison time. Like this is going on. And everybody that's like, yeah, we know. There's a whole other part of society that doesn't know. There's a whole other part of society that's like, they need to go to prison for the rest of their lives. This happened to me. What about me? Right? Or whatever. And so those are the people that I need to be having the conversations with. And so I have had a couple of people reach out with some really tragic stories. One in particular, like the story was just, we spoke for like 2 to 3 days in chat messages, and the person that did a bunch of really terrible things is serving 20 years. And so my conversation is really like, so how do you feel about when 20 years is up? You know, because 20 years isn't that long. It might seem like a long time now, but you know, what do we do? What do we do then? What do we do then? So how would you feel knowing that the person didn't do anything but lift weights, play cards, and talk crap the whole time they were there? You know what I mean? Like, or, you know, what if these things were in place? Like, would you feel safer? Would you feel safer? And so those are the conversations that I really want to start having with people. And part of it is for, you know, support, and this is a really great idea, and part of it is like, yeah, she's credible, I'm voting for her. So, you know, I mean, there'll be a whole bunch of other things, you know, that those are the dimensions that my eyes are focusing on right now, but nothing is ever, you know, things are always more vast. So that's sort of the idea of starting that conversation. I just really realized that um, the people that already believe me aren't the ones I need to be talking to. So like back in 2009 when I was in prison, there was this guy, and I share this story all the time, but there's this guy, and he came in, and he was a church guy, and he's super spiritual, and he prophesied over me, and he said, you're going to make prisons a better place to live, and it's not going to happen from in here. And I was like, okay. I was like, can we get something else? Like, you know, you're going to be rich and famous. Like, or, yeah, I mean, not that I really want to be rich and famous, but like, you know, just something fantastic. And I had absolutely no idea how fantastic that actually was. And so as my life is sort of unraveled since then, you know, it started out with meeting Ari and then going into prisons. And I was like, and these little moments in time, I would be reminded of that. And then, you know, I became very passionate about some of this stuff. And then this situation occurred in my life that has allowed me to show up very differently. And it was a very tragic situation. And honestly, like the situation with my husband, I didn't know. I thought maybe that was going to be the thing that broke me, right? The thing that made me able to participate in life. Like I didn't know if that was going to be the PTSD occurrence that snapped my reality and that made me a worthless freaking human being. You know what I mean? And I hate that fact that I literally just said worthless human being, because I don't believe that anybody is worthless. But that sort of like incapacitated me to where I could no longer provide for myself and my family, because I had just started to be a provider, and because I was a drug addict for a long time. And so, you know, so that passionately like sent me down this road, and the things that have sort of unraveled heading me in that direction, oftentimes without like, I mean, I'm showing up to do the work, but I'm not really like kicking in the doors. The doors are like opening up and yanking me inside of them essentially. And so, but that is the thing that keeps coming up for me. And the deal is that this stuff it's not about me. Like, it's not about me. I really feel like my life fed me a story that allows me to be a voice for other people. And my story is like, I'm grateful for it. Like, I'm grateful for it because I'm able to articulate it to a lot of different people in a way that allows for a lot of change. And so it's about other people. And so I think like singing to the choir, I really like that. Let's just simplify that, right? Like singing to the choir allows my ego to be very involved and for it to become my agenda. And I watch a lot of people get lost in that and having it be about them and having, you know, and I mean, granted, there are a lot of former prisoners right now that are doing a lot of really great things. And I say a lot because in the past, you didn't see, like, I know a number of people that are working in government, like, I mean, Washington, D.C., Georgetown, freaking the Capitol, you know, people like opening the door to legislative seats and things like that. And I'm super grateful for them because our histories look different,
Yeah.
but we're existing under the same umbrella. So their path into that door may not look as extreme as mine, but it's opening a door for me because on my own, I would have had a hard time getting through it. So we're going to applaud them. And then I'm going to come through the door with a freaking entourage of people that are getting ready to break down the house. That's kind of like my goal, because it's not about me. It's about the people that are inside. It's about the kids that are on their way. It's about the families that are broken and lost, and those that are in the foster system because their parents are incarcerated. And, you know, there's a huge part of society that I want to mend. And anyway,
over the course of the next 5 years, these conversations like start in Messenger on Facebook, but then like where do they move out to? Like where are these places that, what are the different like steps along the way that those conversations need to be had?
You know, this is what the Truman Scholarship did for me, is that it started asking me these questions, and then it sort of made me solidify my goals and my plan. Over the next 5 years, I want to be able to start like advocating for them, for these ideas in Olympia. I'm gonna start to use this stuff. There are some people and some groups that are trying to implement things in the system. I definitely want us to have conversations with them and see what they're doing, to see if I want to saddle up with them or somehow figure out how to sort of move forward on my own. And that was a question I had for myself. Now what? Now that I'm having them, now what?
Yeah.
Right. And so then we start writing this stuff down, and then I talk to my professor, and I figure out like what direction I want to go in research and how I really sort of make that happen. I figure out, you know, who I want to get involved with and how to use these stories, and to see if I can get some of these people to be willing to tell their stories in Olympia, and support that and figure out like how I move forward politically. I mean, that's kind of like, and I want to use part of it for my own political progression. And I want to use it to sort of advocate with, the Department of Corrections. And I got to figure out how to address that. Like, I don't exactly know.
Yeah.
So I don't exactly know like who we address to implement these changes. I know some people, this is the problem that I run into with people in the community that have any sort of involvement with the prison system, is that, oh, you're not going to be able to do that. You're not going to be able to do that. And when I have these conversations, they're like, oh, financially, it's not possible. They're trying to do this. It's not possible. When I have these conversations, I usually walk away feeling very disheartened and feeling like I need to change my trajectory. And then I have a conversation with the prisoner, right? So this actually happened last week. So I had a conversation with this person. I felt very disillusioned after the conversation. I felt like I'm on the wrong path. And I base a lot of what I do off of how I feel here, right? Like what's happening here? Like, do I feel spiritually connected to what it is that I'm doing? And when I feel whole in considering these things, I know that it's the right thing. And so my intellect, I don't think people's intellect serve us to a certain extent, but like I have a spiritual attunement that like I really sort of consult in making most of my decisions. And so so I talked to this person, I'm super disillusioned. I'm like reconsidering everything. And then I talked to my friend who's in work release, who just got out of prison. He's been to prison 9 or 10 times, right? And he's talking to me about the prison, and he's talking to me about this one program, and he's talking to me about these guys, and he's talking to me about the environment. And then I start talking to him about my plan, and he's like, yes, there's this guy. And it's sort of reaffirmed in me. He tells me about this guy that's in the prison that he was in last time, and how he's doing the same thing on a really small scale, but he's giving people the opportunity and saying, you know what, get out of my class. And I was like, that's the problem right there, is that we're saying, oh, I can't handle you, get out.
Yeah.
Well, I want to make sure we handle everybody. I want prison to not be colorblind anymore. The majority of people that are being exposed to things that can change their life, the majority of them are white. And, you know, which, you know, I'm not saying that it's like the disparity is there because people are choosing it. I'm just saying that the majority of people that are choosing to get help are within a certain like race. And if we mandate those things, then everybody gets an opportunity. You know what I mean? And so anyways, when I had a conversation with him, I was like, no, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And I felt it in my heart. And it wasn't just like this overinflated, you know, thing like, yeah, this is a great idea. But it was just like, no, this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And like, you know, so like over like the last like 4 years, when the stuff happened with my husband, it was really tremendous. It was horrific. And I was really afraid for myself, because I have had a really long history of addiction and abuse and things like that, and giving up on myself and quitting. And I was really afraid that I was going to crumble. And I was afraid that it could potentially lead to relapse. I didn't have a lot of faith in myself. I didn't trust myself. And, you know, right before this happened with my husband, I had done this training. And I think this was probably a really huge part of sort of solidifying this plan. I did a facilitator training for this program. It's called WRAP, Wellness Recovery Action Plan. And first you have to create your own plan before you can become a facilitator of a group. And so I created this plan, and in this plan, what you do is you write out, when you're doing well, you write out sort of a map and a plan for what to do when you're not doing well. So this thing happens, and I'm, you know, battered, beaten, terrified, bruised all over my body. Like I couldn't go to work, scared to death, afraid of the potential of what was going to occur. And also I recognized what happened was I posted about it. That's how I would get a lot of support, and sort of made it through a lot of times in my early recovery. And people immediately responded with hate, right? Like they immediately responded with hate, and not in a way that was like malicious, but that because they loved me so much, right? And it really dawned on me in that moment, like, he doesn't need hate, he needs help, you know? And so, and in that, like, it allowed me to sort of be softer with myself. And then I recognized, like, I had that rap plan. I had that thing, and it was authentic, right? I didn't just do it for show. And so I started to participate in the things that I said made me feel well. And I started participating in them on a daily basis. I would get up in the morning, I would pray, I would meditate, I would journal, I would read scriptures, I would read other recovery material. I started working out. And what I found was that I mentally became a lot stronger. And, you know, I was like, it changed my life. And then I started like listening to these motivational talks. And I started running, and I would listen to some of this stuff like in the mornings when I was working out. And it just sort of really reaffirmed for me like that whatever I tell myself is the truth. You know what I mean? And so, and I used some of that stuff just to sort of bring myself out of that. And that's the same kind of stuff that I started to really communicate to other people. You know what I mean? I started telling them what they can do.
And I think it's also really exciting that like you're at UW while this is happening, like the network of people that you can go to for resources and support.
And I agree with you. And actually, like, okay, so I was a finalist in a semi-finalist in the Jack Kent Cooke scholarship, which is like one of the biggest scholarships for students in, you know, the nation. It's like $120,000 scholarship. And so I started recruited by all these new Ivy League schools, right? And so I applied to Yale, but I really I really wanted to go to UW because I know what UW is involved in. You know what I mean? And I knew that I would go there and network, but I had no idea. Like in just 9, and actually it's only 7 short months, like the connections that I've made, the support that I have, it's unbelievable.